There's a version of you that stops arguing with itself. No hesitation before the hard call. No internal debate before the hard rep. Just the action, arriving before the thought that was supposed to produce it. Most people will never meet that version of themselves. And the ones who do get there, the people around them stop saying impressive. They start saying something else. That's not normal. You've felt the opposite of this 1,000 times. The alarm goes off, and a committee convenes in your skull before your feet hit the floor. 5 more minutes. You earned it. Start tomorrow. That committee is exhausting, and it never actually votes in your favor. Today I'm going to show you why the committee exists, why willpower can't shut it down, and what happens to a person once it goes quiet for good. The Japanese have a word for that silence, Mushin, and it is not peaceful. It is not what the wellness industry has told you it is. It is closer to a system failure than a meditation retreat. Once you understand what it actually costs to get there, you'll understand why almost nobody does. Before that, subscribe and drop a comment telling me the one moment in your life where your mind went completely silent, even for a second. You'll want to compare notes by the end of this. Chapter 1. The Freeze. Dana Whitfield was 29 years old and had wanted to be an ICU nurse since she was 14. She got there. Top of her cohort, a residency at a level 1 trauma center, the kind of hands that other nurses ask to double-check their lines. On paper, she was exactly who she set out to be. There was just one problem, and it only showed up during codes. A code is when a patient's heart stops. Alarms, a room filling with people, 30 seconds to do everything right, or watch someone die on a Tuesday afternoon. Dana knew the protocol cold. She could recite it in her sleep. But the moment the alarm actually sounded, something in her seized. Not panic exactly. Worse than panic. A half-second of total internal noise. 100 competing instructions firing at once, and her hands would lag behind her training by just enough to matter. Her supervisor called it hesitation. Dana called it something she couldn't explain to anyone, because it didn't look like fear from the outside. It looked like thinking. And thinking, in a code, is a luxury nobody survives. She tried everything the internet told her to try. Box breathing, visualization the night before a shift, a sports psychologist who had her write affirmations on index cards, cognitive behavioral worksheets. Some of it helped for a week. None of it survived contact with an actual arrest. After 18 months, her charge nurse pulled her aside and said, gently, that maybe bedside critical care wasn't the right fit, that maybe she'd be better somewhere slower. Dana went home that night and did something that had nothing to do with nursing school. She started reading about people who don't hesitate under pressure for a living. Bomb disposal technicians, free solo climbers, combat medics. And buried in an old interview with a kendo instructor, she found a phrase that stopped her cold. He wasn't talking about nursing. He wasn't talking about America at all. He was describing a state his students trained toward for years, one most of them never reached. Mushin, the mind with nothing in it. He said something in that interview that she read 4 times. The sword does not hesitate because the sword does not think. The hand that hesitates is a hand still arguing with itself. Dana wasn't holding a sword, but she recognized the argument. Chapter 2. What the old system actually trained. Here's the part almost nobody gets right about Mushin, including most of the people selling it to you in a $10 course. It is not calm. It is not relaxation. It is not being present in the yoga studio sense of the phrase. Mushin is the deliberate removal of an entire step in the decision-making chain. Under normal conditions, your brain runs a loop before any meaningful action. Perceive, evaluate, decide, act. That evaluate step is where the committee meets. It's where you weigh the risk, second-guess the plan, calculate what people will think, flinch at the size of the task. In a crisis, that loop is a liability, because it takes time you don't have, and energy you'll need later. Kendo, Kyudo, and the older sword schools of feudal Japan weren't training students to fight better, in some abstract sense. They were training students to delete the evaluate step entirely, so that perception led straight to action, with nothing in between. Thousands of repetitions of the same cut, the same draw, the same stance, done until the body no longer consulted the mind for permission. The goal wasn't more skill. Skill was a side effect. The goal was silence. This matches something modern neuroscience only figured out fairly recently, and mostly by accident, while studying something unrelated: expert motor performance. Researchers looking at elite athletes under fMRI found a strange pattern. Novices show heavy activity in the prefrontal cortex when performing a skill, the part of the brain responsible for conscious deliberation. Experts, doing the exact same task at a far higher level, show that control shifts down into the basal ganglia and cerebellum, older structures that operate faster than conscious thought and don't ask permission from it. In plain language, the less your brain thinks about what it's doing, the better it usually does it. Thinking, past a certain point of training, isn't discipline. It's static on the line. Dana read this and thought about every code she'd frozen in. She hadn't lacked skill. Her hands knew the compressions, the doses, the sequence. What she'd had was a prefrontal cortex that refused to shut up at the exact moment silence was the only thing that mattered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Chapter 3. The War Nobody Sees. Here's where it gets uncomfortable, so stay with me. Willpower and Mushin are not the same tool pointed at the same problem. They're opposites. Willpower is what you use to force one side of an internal argument to beat the other side. It requires two competing forces, a should and a want, locked in a fight, with willpower as the referee dragging one across the finish line. That's why it's exhausting. You're not doing one thing. You're doing three things: fighting, resisting, and then, if you win, finally acting. Mushin doesn't referee the fight. It removes one of the fighters. There's no internal debate to win, because there's no debate happening. This is the part people find genuinely unsettling once they understand it, because it means the version of you capable of true consistency isn't a stronger version of your current self. It's a self with an entire argument surgically removed. Some people hear that and get excited. Other people hear that and feel something closer to dread, because it means the you doing the hesitating, negotiating, rationalizing, that entire familiar internal voice has to go quiet, possibly forever, in the specific moments that matter. Dana brought this to a therapist she'd started seeing, mostly to talk through the job situation. His name was Dr. Amir Reyes, and unlike most of the people she'd consulted, he didn't try to hand her a coping mechanism. He asked her a question instead. When you freeze in a code, what exactly are you thinking about? She had to sit with that one. Whether I'm doing it right, and whether I'll remember the next step, whether everyone in the room can see me doubting myself. So, in the half second where a patient needs you to just move, you're running a performance review on yourself. She hadn't put it that way before, but yes, exactly that. That's not a confidence problem, he said. That's an architecture problem. You built a habit of narrating yourself in real time, and now you can't turn the narrator off when the moment demands silence instead of commentary. Chapter 4. The Protocol. Dr. Reyes didn't give Dana a pep talk. He gave her a drill, and it was almost insultingly small. For the next 21 days, every single shift, she would perform one specific low-stakes clinical task, checking a patient's IV line, exactly the same way, at the exact same point in her rounds, without evaluating it afterward. No mental replay. No, did I do that well? Just the action, then immediately moving on. The task itself barely mattered. What mattered was training her nervous system to complete an action without opening the review process afterward. "You're not practicing IV checks," he told her. "You're practicing letting an action finish without your permission to grade it." The first few days felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. Her mind kept reaching for the debrief that wasn't coming. By day 9, something had shifted enough that she noticed its absence. A strange sensation, like patting your pocket for a phone that's already in your hand. By day 16, she caught herself doing the check and walking away before she'd consciously registered finishing it. This matches something researchers at University College London found when they finally tested the popular claim that habits form in 21 days, a number that, as it turns out, came from a 1960s plastic surgeon's casual observation and somehow calcified into pop science law. The real data, tracking participants over 12 weeks, put true automaticity closer to 2 months on average. But there was a second finding that mattered more than the headline number. 21 days wasn't when the habit formed. It was roughly when the internal resistance to the habit went quiet. The behavior itself took longer to automate. The argument about the behavior ended much sooner. That distinction is the whole game. You don't need to wait 2 months to feel different. You need to survive the first 3 weeks of your nervous system, testing whether you'll actually hold the line, because that's the period where the committee is loudest, and once it realizes you're not negotiating anymore, it starts showing up less. Dana didn't fix her freezing during a code, not directly. She fixed something upstream of it, the habit of narrating herself in real time. And once that habit weakened in low-stakes moments, it had less power in high-stakes ones too. Chapter 5. The first real test day. 31. A patient in Bay 4, coded at 2:47 in the afternoon, mid-shift, no warning. Dana would tell you later that she doesn't fully remember the first 90 seconds. Not because she blacked out, because there was nothing to remember in the way she used to remember things. No internal monologue, no performance review running in the background. She was doing compressions before she'd consciously decided to walk over. Her hands had already called out the dose before her mind caught up enough to hear itself say it out loud. The patient stabilized. Dana stepped back from the bed and felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not relief. Something closer to disorientation. She'd done the hardest thing her job required, and could barely account for how. Her charge nurse, the same one who'd suggested a slower unit 18 months earlier, caught her in the hallway afterward. "You didn't hesitate at all in there." "No," Dana said. "I don't think I was really there for the deciding part." That sentence sounds like a joke. It isn't. It's the most accurate description of Mushin you'll find outside a dojo. The self that debates, hesitates, and performs its own competence for an invisible audience simply wasn't running the show in that moment. Something faster and quieter was. Chapter 6. Why it's frightening. Here's the part most videos on this topic skip, because it's less marketable than unlock peak performance. Mushin is not comfortable to watch from the outside, and it's not entirely comfortable to live either. People who reach it consistently get described the same way, over and over, by the people around them. Unnervingly calm, cold, almost, scary focused. Not because they're colder people, but because the visible evidence of internal struggle, the sighing, the second guessing, the "let me think about it," all of that disappears, and humans use those signals to gauge each other. When someone stops giving them off, it reads as alien, even when what's actually happening underneath is just a well-trained nervous system doing its job without a running commentary. Dana's coworkers started saying it within a month. Nothing rattles her anymore, meant as a compliment, delivered a little warily. Her sister asked if she was okay, because she'd gotten quiet. She was fine, better than fine. She just wasn't performing her doubt out loud anymore, because there wasn't as much doubt left to perform. That's the trade nobody advertises. You don't get the silence and keep the old version of yourself intact underneath it. The old version was the noise, Getting rid of one means losing the other. Most people, if they're honest, aren't actually sure they want that trade, even while they say they want the consistency it produces. They want the results of Mushin while keeping the internal narrator who takes credit for them. You can't have both. The narrator is exactly what has to go quiet. Chapter 7. What this costs, and what it gives back. 2 years after that code, Dana trains new nurses on exactly one thing that has nothing to do with a textbook: how to let an action finish without grading it in real time. She doesn't call it Mushin to them. She calls it getting out of your own way, because that phrase doesn't scare people off in an orientation meeting. She'll tell you, if you ask directly, that willpower never solved her problem. Not once. Not in 18 months of trying to force herself to stay calm through sheer effort. What solved it was smaller and stranger than that. 21 days of letting one unimportant action happen without a verdict attached to it. A narrator that got a little quieter every day it wasn't asked to speak, and eventually, a code where her hands moved before her opinion of herself had time to show up and slow them down. You've spent years being told the fix for inconsistency is more force. Push harder, want it more. Grit your teeth through the resistance. But resistance isn't a wall you push through. It's a conversation you're still having with yourself. And every rep of pushing through is just another round of that same exhausting debate, won by force instead of ended for good. Mushin doesn't ask you to win the argument. It asks you to stop being the kind of person who has one. That's a much harder thing to sign up for than try harder, and it's exactly why almost nobody actually does it, and exactly why the ones who do get looked at a little differently by everyone, still stuck negotiating with themselves every morning. If this changed how you think about discipline, subscribe and tell me in the comments, what's the one small, boring, unglamorous action you'd be willing to repeat for 21 days without judging it once? Not the big goal, the small one underneath it. That's where this actually starts. Thanks for staying to the end. I'll see you in the next one.